Aloha and welcome to Power in Partnership, an online master series for couples who want it all, where we take a moment to focus on what matters most, to reconnect to our beloved, to grow that conscious partnership, and really take the time to settle here now. And I'm delighted to welcome my guest today, Pilar Jennings. And she joins us from her office in, I believe it's New York City. Is that correct, Pilar?
Yes.
So please take a moment and introduce yourselves for us.
Hello, Amy Elizabeth. It's a pleasure to be here with you. I'm Dr. Pilar Jennings, and I'm a psychoanalyst in private practice here in New York City. I'm also a writer and a lecturer at Union Theological Seminary, Columbia, and the Nalanda Institute.
Wonderful, wonderful. It's delightful to have this bridge of connection via the internet and to share our thoughts on some very important matters around partnership and what matters most. So thank you for introducing me. I keep forgetting to introduce myself. I am Amy Elizabeth Gordon. I'm delighted to be your host here at Power in Partnership as we bring in relationship experts from around the world. And as always, I invite us to start our moment here today with just lowering the gaze or closing the eyes if we're comfortable, and really taking that time to inhale and exhale with some intention. So inhaling everything that has already transpired today, and gently exhaling, releasing what is no longer needed in this moment right here, right now. And inhaling the thoughts and future plans. And exhaling, bringing ourselves gently back to this moment. And then inhaling the sweetness of this moment right here, right now. And exhaling. And then I invite us, Pilar, to begin and end our time together with a bow, to honor the wisdom within, to honor that moment of the head dropping to the heart, connecting and inhaling and exhaling. It is an absolute delight and honor to be with someone else who is so well versed with the contemplative practices and the intricacies of the mind and the psychological approach, and holding that bigger view and finding that way to perhaps take our own personal experience, our knowledge that we've learned throughout the years, and share that to benefit all beings. So thank you so much for joining me here today. And I'll offer up a few sentence stems to get us started. So as I'm sitting here, I'm experiencing.
I'm experiencing, I think, a sense of anticipation and contentment and delight in being here with you and being part of this conversation.
Wonderful, wonderful. I would say that I'm experiencing similar things. The delightful anticipation, yes. And Pilar, where I would like to be at the end of my life, how would you fill in that sentence stem?
It's such an important question. It's a big question. And I think what feels most important to me as I imagine the end of my life is having lived around and into a sense of what's most meaningful, and then having been able to, if not completely relinquish, contain whatever distracts from that meaning. Both the pleasures and the difficulties.
So what I'm really hearing is that desire at the end of your life to really still be wedded to purpose. Am I getting you?
Well, it has many layers.
Okay.
As a Buddhist practitioner and as a psychoanalyst, I feel called to keep plumbing the depths. and from a Buddhist perspective, I would say it's really about orienting this life toward my awakening in such a way that I'm able to connect meaningfully and truthfully with other beings. And how to keep at that process, but also simultaneously to really have containment with whatever takes me away from that awakening and from the ongoing cultivation of what allows for that awakening.
Yes, yes. I'm really hearing that emphasis on the containment of both good and bad, just being focused on the awakening, the awareness, and cultivating that throughout your life, and exploring the depths. I love that. Plumbing the depths.
Plumbing the depths.
That's a wonderful phrase. Pilar, one thing that I'm doing that's helping me continue to plumb the depths, how would you respond to that?
Well, I would say having a spiritual practice, having methods to enter into what's happening within my own mind and heart, and also to notice what distracts me from that reality. And so just utilizing those resources. Right? I mean, we all have resources, but often I hear from friends and from patients that the difficulty sometimes is in whether or not we're actually using them.
Right.
So to just sustain that daily connection with what gives meaning, where I can feel held and supported and going within.
Yeah. I appreciate your mentioning that sometimes there are those of us who know we have this vast spiritual toolkit and we end up tripping over it on our way out in the morning.
Uh-huh. On the way to get a latte, we're tripping over it.
Right, as we're hustling to get to the meditation center.
Right.
Yeah. So, Pilar, how would you respond to the idea of what matters most in terms of that spiritual awakening, utilizing those tools? What matters most?
I think there needs to be a conscious commitment to getting to know oneself as fully as possible, which includes our shadow, the parts that are hard to get to know, and especially the parts of our experience that are complex or challenging, to really have the intention to cultivate more conscious relationship with those parts so that we can know others more fully and that we can allow for their shadow as well.
Yes. What I'm hearing is a phrase that I remember from my training at Naropa, that idea of cultivating Maitri for self, that self-compassion.
Yeah.
Maitri being the Sanskrit word, and then having the skillful means with others, that it's the both and. Am I getting you?
Yeah, absolutely. I think compassion is key, right? Because it's hard to get to know ourselves. I would say it's impossible to get to know ourselves without the compassion. Otherwise, we're going to suffer a lot of shame and usually self-attack when we're getting close to the shadow. And so I would say the compassion allows for that deepening process of knowing ourselves. And then we can use that compassion for a deepening connection with others.
Yeah. Great. So going on that compassion, I would imagine that weaving the compassion and the daily spiritual practice that you have to plumb the depths, to know yourself and to be of service to others is the broad view. And I'm curious if there's one way that you tend to that. Like if you could tell us one of the tools in your spiritual toolkit, would you be willing to share that?
Yeah, I would say a combination of prayer and meditation. For me is so helpful. And the prayers, I tend to use Tibetan Buddhist prayers as the prayers that I love and learn from my teacher, and they're just a helpful reminder, right? Because often we're coping with so much stimulation and so many stressors that to have a touchstone. For me, prayer is a key touchstone. just to remember compassion is available. It just needs to be cultivated or supported. And then the meditation is a way to just let the prayer get into the mind and the heart and the body.
So I'm really curious about the practice of prayer and meditation in terms of really having it be accessible. I guess I'm really picturing this spiritual toolkit, and I love to just kind of check in with where I am right now, and that is that I'm 5 hours behind Pilar right now. So I set my sights early this morning to get my contemplative practices done, and it kind of was a different time frame. So I didn't have the normal rhythm of sitting and doing, but I realized that prayer and meditation are accessible at any time. So for me, it's both the structure of a daily rhythm and the immediate accessibility, that I can come back to that compassionate heart and cultivating that, even if I'm in the dark, pre-sunrise, out doing my practices. So I'm curious for you, do you have the structure, the spontaneity, or a little bit of the both and?
Yeah, I think it's the both and, because as you rightly say, Amy Elizabeth, we have formal practice so that we're able to practice when we're off the cushion, right? When we're in life, when we're at the grocery store, we're interacting with a student or a friend or a colleague. That's what these practices are for. And we have times of formal practice only to support the much more extensive time, right, out in the world. So I think this is true of all faith traditions. I mean, the reason why we have spiritual centers and places where we can go, or mala beads, right, or shrines or altars are really just as reminders of what we're going to be trying to live out. So yeah, I think like you, it's a combination of having some intentional formal practice, and then transitioning to how to bring that into the day, into the world.
Right. I guess I feel it's very important to highlight that, because so often when I first started contemplative practices decades ago, I had the impression that it required that structure, that it needed to happen at a certain time. We needed to go to the centers. I needed to go to the mountaintop to seek enlightenment. And, you know, I feel that perhaps is an obstacle to a lot of people. And as we're exploring power in partnership and getting ourselves resourced so that we can show up more fully for our beloved, for the other, I want to really highlight that it's accessible anywhere, that the structured daily practice is there as a tether and a touchstone. And when schedules shift or daily rhythms are different, there can be that on the go sort of opportunity. And so for me, I just needed that reminder. So I wanted to chime in around that, and curious if you have anything to say about that.
It's such an important point. I hear this from students all the time, that the difficulty is in sustaining the practice when a schedule changes or something in life happens unexpectedly. And it's so helpful to know that formal practice doesn't have to be an hour of meditation at 5 a.m. every day or nothing, right? It can be 5 minutes of just bringing some gentle awareness to the breath, perhaps having some kind of a mantra or prayer, something that feels containing and awakening, right? And this is something that one could do anywhere while they're waiting for an airplane, while they're waiting in line at the grocery store, right? We don't have to give up our practice if we're busy, or if life is dealing us unexpected experiences.
Right. And I love to weave that into my work with couples, to just give them a few moments, not just the 3 breaths as we did at the beginning of our interview, but just to face each other, to soften the gaze, to look at each other in that, and then go within, catch in with the breath, and then come back. And I think that sense of being resourced is part of the topic that you brought today. So without any further ado, I want to get into this notion of rupture and repair. So if you would be willing to start with one tool that you could give our audience right now regarding that topic, and then we can explore a little more around that.
Well, I think a tool that's very helpful for relationship is the practice of mindfulness, which simply put is the ability to notice more non-judgmentally, right? To in particular notice those strong habituated feelings or narratives, and then drop down below some of that either entrenched or tumultuous activity, and try to directly access what someone is experiencing. This can be both, again, very containing and illuminating, and it's, I think, indispensable when it comes to working on relationships.
I love the word indispensable because what you're talking about, that very concept of mindfulness in the notion of non-judgmental awareness of other and what's going on within, in terms of letting go of the storylines, that I could vaporize my partner right now, or he's going to save my life, or she means the world to me, and if she doesn't do this, then ... The stories we create about our own realities, get that moment of pause in the act of mindfulness, of just dropping and letting go of the judgment. And again, to highlight your word, indispensable. And I feel the power struggle that I see in many, many couples is getting caught in the judgment, primarily judgment of self, and then that gets projected onto the other. And so how to disentangle from all of that. So would you like to say a little more about your topic, rupture and repair?
Yeah. Well, I chose this topic for our conversation because in my experience as an analyst, most couples come into treatment because they've experienced what I would describe as a rupture in the connection. And there's usually some dear hope that it's going to be possible to work out whatever's caused the rupture or extreme feelings of disconnection, and reconnect or repair that feeling of being on the same page, on the same side, there for one another. So that's what I was looking forward to talking with you today.
Yeah. So a couple comes in and they've had that rupture and they're really caught in that gridlock, if you will, that power struggle. How do you start? What's one way you begin that work with them?
Mm-hmm. Well, the initial stage is really a process of getting to know them and hearing more about their sense of the relationship. And also just its evolution, right? Because generally speaking, people come together initially out of a feeling of attraction, a feeling of connection. So it was there. And I think just holding the space to hear a little bit more about how each person remembers that connection, right? Remembers what drew them into the relationship, can be very helpful, because obviously it's easily lost, right? We easily lose the conscious connection with that original feeling of being drawn in closer to someone when things are extremely hard or even treacherous. So that's where I like to begin, and then to also give both people time to tell me more about what brought them into treatment. What are they hoping to work on? What are they hoping will come from our work together?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I'm really hearing that notion that I'm trusting our audience can draw from, of just the ability to hold space. Mm-hmm. You know, as being able to go into an office to seek professional help and have someone else hold that container. Mm-hmm. Ideally can then be something that the couple, each individual can learn how to contain within themselves. Mm-hmm. And then learn, those skills of showing up. And, one reason I'm so passionate about bringing these interviews out there is I feel like there's so many skills that we just don't learn growing up. We don't learn the mindfulness in our home. We don't learn the non-judgmental ability to bear witness to someone else's journey. We don't learn that compassion for self. I know that is a big part of the work, is to create that space, as you said, hold that space, hear the stories, rekindle that connection of what was it like when you met. And I'm curious about the teaching of mindfulness. Is there a simple practice that you could offer up for our audience today?
Well, sure. I mean, there are different ways to practice, but generally speaking, first just noticing something that's going to be an object of focus, right? Some place where you can bring your awareness, whether it's the breath, which it's a wonderful object of focus because as long as we're alive, the breath is always with us, or if it's a candle or a flower, somewhere for your mind to rest and to be. And simply to notice, right, what it's like to arrive in that moment, bringing one's awareness to that object of focus. And then similarly to notice when the mind goes somewhere else, which it invariably will. And even as an analyst, I think it's helpful to be curious about where the mind went, right? What pulls us away? And in traditional mindfulness practice, students would be encouraged to just let that distraction settle and then come back to one's object of focus. And in that way, we're cultivating both the ability to hold our focus or to concentrate, but then also to notice what arises, right? The more the mind settles, the more we're able to really see what's happening internally. Without that, that ability to just arrive somewhere, for the mind just to settle, we can have all sorts of thoughts and feelings and insights and not really be able to grow from them, to be nourished by them. Yeah.
I think I'm already sensing that just in your presence, the ability that you would have to allow that space for people to invite in the mindfulness of object of focus. And I'm curious, do you offer that in your sessions with people? Do you take a moment there, or is it instruction and encourage them to do it back in their own home?
I mean, with couples, not so much, because usually there's a lot going on. Working with couples is often extremely active and can be quite challenging, I think, in a wonderful way. But there's so much content because in each couple, you have the two present day people, you have their histories, then you have all of the key players in their respective lives whom they've internalized that are getting activated in the relationship. And I'm there with my history and my inner chorus of players. So the couples work is very active. And if things are getting so active that I find it's no longer helpful in session, then I might say something like, can we pause here? Right, just to let this activation that's happening settle, right? Because the work isn't going to be helpful enough. It's not going to be productive if you're both highly activated. Right. So I will use mindfulness, but not in a classical or traditional way. Right.
Yeah, as you're describing it, that image of the office gets crowded pretty quickly, right?
Yes. Yes.
And I appreciate the phrase, let the activation settle. And I think that if that skill set can be honed, if it can be practiced in an office setting, in a therapeutic setting with professional guidance, and then to be able to take that back home. Yeah. I've found in my work with couples and in my own personal life that sense of the activation is so activated, it can be somewhat discombobulating and throw one off center. And then it's harder to respond with a compassionate, non-judgmental, oh, I imagine this must be a difficult moment for you. And it's conscious partnership. And what we're talking about is how to grow the conscious partnership, and that ability to contain, to let the activation settle, to come back to oneself. And then, as you were saying, we can have the storylines come up in a mindfulness practice, and we can let go of them and come back to the object of focus. The flower, the candle, the breath is I always tell people, it's right in your back pocket. You don't need a prescription. You don't need, it's always available to you, that breath. And there's something about how to not beat up on oneself, knowing I always have my breath with me. Why am I getting into this place of being overly activated? And so in that rupture and repair moment on an individual basis, and how that plays out in the couples landscape, I'm curious how you navigate that, if I was able to articulate that clearly.
Yeah, I think, one of the things that I really appreciate about the analytic method is the respect for how complex relationship is. And so I try as an analyst to be very patient as we track what's in the experience of activation. So it's sometimes the case that a couple is feeling the rupture in part because what's happened either for one of them or for both of them in an early relationship, whether it's in childhood or sometime prior to that partnership, a developmental trauma has gotten reenacted with the partner. And it can be quite complicated. And so I try to find ways to just let them know that we're doing some difficult work, right? And it might take a little while to map out what's going on. And in a way, I'm describing what I might call an analytic mindfulness, right? We're going to need to find a way just to hold the space as we get clearer and clearer about what's happened. But I also appreciate, Amy Elizabeth, that sometimes for couples that experience of rupture is truly terrifying, right? If it has reawakened a prior loss of a caretaker, and not necessarily loss through death, but loss through malattunement, loss through insecure attachment. It can be terrifying, but it can also feel deadening, right? As if a needed life force has been snuffed out. Mm. So it requires, I think, a lot of patience and a lot of willingness to try to understand deeply and very specifically what's in this rupture.
I'm really appreciating your poetic language around the human heart and the human mind and all that we go through, and that idea of the malattunement and that vital life force being snuffed out. I could just feel that. And knowing that as human beings, we have the ability to feel with each other and exchange that energy. And I think that's one of the key things I hope people can gain more awareness around in the partnership, is that we exchange with each other. And when we can see that, oh, my beloved has gone through a significant wound as a child and may not have even been fully aware of it, but as that unfolds, to have that atmosphere of respect, have that atmosphere of containment and that safety, to be able to hold that with one another really does require work. It does require dedication and a sense of, the classic term differentiation, to be able to take care of oneself and still be emotionally present with the other. And we don't, as I said earlier, we don't learn this in school. And so to get skills, I love it when someone calls me and they're looking for services. I said, your asking for help is a great sign of strength. Thank you for being willing to reach out. And so what I'm really hearing in your words of wisdom today, Pilar, is just that sense of it takes time.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm curious, if it takes time and it can be difficult and it may need guidance, what's the payoff? What makes it worthwhile? And maybe we can kind of wrap up our interview focusing on, why would somebody do this? Why would a couple, seek analytic mindfulness, counseling? Why would someone want to do the work? And I could answer that, but I'm curious your take on it.
The payoff is truly profound, Amy Elizabeth, because when we do that very difficult, demanding, courageous work of truly examining what's gotten in the way of connecting meaningfully, respectfully, lovingly with another person, we have the potential to really break through what causes feelings of isolation. And I would say in the most rudimentary way, in couples treatment, there's the potential to grow within oneself that space in the mind to hold the contents of another person's mind. Right? I mean, this is part of attachment theory and developmental intersubjective theory, that ideally when we're infants, if we're in relationship with a caretaker who's pretty attuned to what we're experiencing, it will develop within us that feeling of being held internally by another, but also the capacity, right, to hold that space in our mind for the person caring for us. Now, if that never happened, right, if we were cared for by someone who, for a variety of reasons, wasn't able to hold in their mind the truth of who we were or who we were becoming or what we were feeling, we're going to need to develop that space later in order to have fulfilling, meaningful relationship. Right? Otherwise, it's always, to use Jessica Benjamin's phrase, doer or done to. It's always a sense of reactivity. Who's going to survive, right? Who's going to dominate and who's going to submit? The only way to work through that is to cultivate that abiding space within that is deeply curious about the truth of what someone else is going through. And that's what can happen in good couples treatment. When it happens, we end up feeling much more connected, not just with the partner, but with all beings. It really starts to dissolve the feeling of entrenched isolation. And this is so protective against depression, anxiety, suicidality, right? It's truly generative, it's life-giving. So while the work is really hard, and I respect couples hugely for having the willingness to seek treatment, it promises a tremendous payoff if you stay the course.
Thank you for that description of the benefits, the payoffs, the opportunities that await when couples dedicate themselves to a practice of understanding on a deeper level, and the image of being able to hold another's mind within the spaciousness of one's own mind, that we are not me, in that beautiful sense of conscious partnership. And I believe that's what's being called on us as individuals in partnership with others, because whether we're in a committed romantic relationship or not, we're in relationship with the world. And there is a lot of social isolation going on. And yet it's a myth. I think as human beings, we are inherently connected and woven into the fibers and fabrics of each other. And so what you just said was such a beautiful signpost, a welcoming sign of, come on, let's do this thing. Let's live. Let's get that generative life force going of letting go of the isolation, letting go of the woe is me, letting go of the, I just love that sense of taking ownership for oneself, one's own awakening, and being willing to bear witness and hold the presence of the other in a way that perhaps the old wounds from childhood that weren't totally healed. That my particular belief is that some of that can be healed in the partnership, in the couplehood, and exchange that energy without the dominating over or submitting to, that there's an equal exchange. Am I getting you, Pilar?
Yeah, absolutely. Right. I mean, ideally, we have early experiences of relationship where there's real mutuality, right? Real sense of mutual recognition, both subjectivities mattering.
Mm-hmm.
And if we didn't, which is all right, many of us didn't, we need to seek out those experiences at another time in adulthood. And because we're relational beings, right? Because everything about us grows in the context of relationship, we do need healthy enough, right? Good enough relationships to keep us in being. And we can, at any age, I know this just based on the research of interpersonal neurobiologists, this isn't a fantasy, right? It's not a new age fantasy, it's just science at this point. We can, at any age, cultivate that feeling of finding ourselves in relationship if the causes and conditions support that growth.
Mm-hmm. It is possible to heal. It is possible to rewire, and it is no longer that, the new age phenomenon. It is the hard science now that's coming out. And I appreciate you bringing that back around, because not only do I get the sense of, I think we're kind of, as I'm seeing it, is naming the obstacles that couples who are listening today, watching this, can recognize. Okay, mindfulness doesn't have to happen at a retreat center on a weekly basis. I can have a personal practice in my own home. Mm-hmm. I can do prayer and meditation on the fly as we're going around, and have that recenter myself and be willing to adopt that more mindful approach of non-judgmental awareness of what's going on. And then the obstacle of, oh my gosh, couples work, going back, childhood wounds, oh my gosh, I didn't have an attuned caregiver. It can feel overwhelming, but to counter that obstacle, the antidote of, it's never too late.
Yeah, it's never too late. And I want to just add, Amy Elizabeth, that it is not only protective of one's own partnership, it's protective to all the people that the individual interacts with. Right, when we do our own courageous healing work, which I know is very hard and takes time and energy, but when we do it, the ripple effects, the healing ripple effects for others are extraordinary, right? Because it affirms for others what's possible, and it also allows us to be more emotionally honest, to be more direct in our communication with others, and to be more curious and compassionate about others.
The idea that the personal work could somehow be a selfish indulgence is another obstacle that I have overcome, because I've come to see how cultivating that own awareness, that cultivation of a compassionate heart, does indeed have a ripple effect.
Yes.
Into my family in a very positive way. And yes. I imagine for many of our listeners, we want to be a force for good. I've always wanted to change the world for the better. And I realize we do it one relationship at a time, starting with that relationship with ourselves and with our beloved, and really having that spiritual toolkit that we keep referring to as a sense that we're not doing it alone, and knowing that you're doing your practice in New York and I'm here. And as you can see, the sun has come out in Hawaii. Aloha, e ala e. We do our morning chant to the sun. I'm so grateful that we have another day. I have another day to rededicate myself to this practice of, I have to look at my notes. What is it? Plumbing the depths, right? It's so important work of understanding without labeling it good or bad, right or wrong, yes or no. Oh, this is a good memory. I want to hold on to it. This is a bad one. I want to push it away. But just allowing that spacious, respectful environment for whatever's going on within myself, within the other, to percolate to the surface, if you will. And then I guess as we wrap up, if there's a final that you would say about what to do when that awareness comes up, if it's coming from a place of being non-judgmental, how to know how to have right action, how to know what the next step is to take.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, one thing I want to affirm is, while I have profound respect for spiritual practice and for the healing impact of mindfulness, I also really respect the psyche and the complexity of the psyche. And so if people are trying to use mindfulness alone or meditation alone to deal with complicated relationship problems, I really just want to affirm that we're all fellow travelers. We all need help and support. And I think it's ultimately esteem enhancing to seek that support. So if one is trying to use mindfulness in order to protect a relationship and it's not working, well, that might be a good sign. Right? What you're becoming aware of is the need for perhaps another person to join you in a healing process. Right. And if it is working, you can really just give yourself the time to discern what do you need to do with what you become aware of. Is the awareness itself healing for the time being? Or is there an action that's needed in order to facilitate something that could be strengthened, or something that needs to change? Mm-hmm. In Buddhist teaching, compassion comes with two parts. There's the awareness of suffering, and then there's the response to suffering. And so in our mindfulness practice, I think it's really helpful just to notice, right, any difficulties, any suffering, but then to be curious about how to respond. And there's no one right answer, but I think the question is a good and an important one.
Thank you for your response to that. There is no one answer. There is no just one thing that we can say, okay, everybody out there do this and all will be well. But it's a worthwhile endeavor, and you've certainly reignited my commitment on a daily basis. I look for that guidance, and thank you for allowing your wisdom to come through the internet waves here and share with us today the idea of repair and rupture and repair, the both and the importance of mindfulness. And I'm curious if you have a free gift or an offering for our audience today.
I'm currently working on that. I hope to be able to offer the introduction to my most recent book, which is called To Heal a Wounded Heart. And it's about relationship, especially early childhood relationship. It's more of a memoir that addresses my approach to this journey, both as a Buddhist and as a psychoanalyst. And so I hope to be able to share the introduction to that book with your listeners.
Great. Well, we'll have people look for details at your website, and they can at least click on it and purchase the book. I know I will be. I look forward to reading more. The memoir piece is really what speaks to me in terms of weaving these concepts into a personal narrative that is accessible. So I really look forward to that. Thank you for guiding us in that direction. And we will end our interview today with a bow. So mahalo nui loa. Great big thanks to you, Pilar.
Thank you so much, Amy Elizabeth. It's been a real joy.
Real joy.